To get a clear picture of Alexander the Great's life and deeds, it's best to start with his father, King Philip II of Macedon. Philip turned the Kingdom of Macedonia, which was about to fall apart, into the most powerful country in the central Mediterranean. Philip laid down the groundwork that Alexander used to build his large kingdom. So when we talk about Alexander's sexual life, we have to start with Philip's. In some ways, their sexual lives were the same, especially when it came to polygamy, and how important it was for the Macedonian ruler to marry more than one person. But their sexual lives were very different in other ways. In this video, we'll talk about a few of the many romantic stories about Philip. Rise of Macedon. King Philip II was one of the most powerful rulers in ancient times, but his story is often dwarfed by that of his famous son. Philip was the ruler of Macedon for 23 years. During that time, he made it the most powerful kingdom in the central Mediterranean. Philip did many things to make this happen. On the military side, he changed the army and its supply system. He is best known for creating the famous Macedonian phalanx shape for his main heavy infantrymen. He won wars against Dardanians, Thessalians, Phocians, Athenians, and Thracians, among others. Philip didn't just get lucky, though. He also worked hard. Philip also grew the size and power of Macedonia in a big way by marrying off his children to the rulers of neighboring countries. Polygamy. Polygamy was probably used by Macedonian kings before Philip II as a political tool, but it was Philip who took it to a whole new level. During his rule, he got married 7 times. Most of them, if not all of them, were clearly polite. 5 of Philip's wives came from royal or wealthy families from nearby countries that were not Macedonian. Philip had used these marriages to form partnerships with nearby powers, sometimes after defeating them on the battlefield. Philip's first wife, Audita, for example, was the daughter of a famous Illyrian king named Bardilas. Philip beat Bardilas in battle very early in his rule. This was one of the first big tests of how well his changes to the Macedonian army were working. Philip married Audita after he beat the Illyrians. He did this to stop any Illyrians from coming back and to protect his northern border. Olympias, who was Alexander the Great's mother, was Philip's most well-known wife. Olympias was a woman from the Kingdom of Macedonia, the most powerful tribe that ruled the area of Epirus, southwest of Macedonia. Philip's union with the Molossians was made possible by her marriage to him. Philip's Macedonian kingdom grew and grew during his 20 years on the throne. Polygamy was a good way for Philip to keep his kingdom together and safe as it grew. Philip got strong allies from his marriages, but they also hurt him in other ways. There were different groups at court, and it wasn't clear who would take Philip's place. Philip had 2 boys. Alexander was his son with Olympias, and Aridaeus was his son with Philina, who was from Thessaly. He also had a cousin named Amyntas and a number of girls, including Sinaine, who was known as the Macedonian Amazon for her skill in battle. Philip's oldest son did not automatically take over as king. During Philip's reign, it was dangerously unknown who would take over after him, a recipe for bloody fighting between different groups inside the Argead court. Philip's many marriages were very important in making his country into the powerful place that Alexander would eventually take over. But the court drama it caused was to be expected, and the fact that the Macedonian succession was not set in stone meant that this tool also contributed to his terrible end. Male lovers. Philip was interested in women in more ways than one. He liked both his wives and his courtesans. He also had a number of relationships with younger men. Similar to what we know about pederasty from ancient Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta, it was common for an older man, called a Erastes, to take a young-looking teenager as a boyfriend, called a Eromenos, at the Macedonian royal court in the 4th century BC. But Pausanias, a Macedonian aristocrat, was the most infamous younger lover in Philip's story. As a page, basically an officer or noble in training, at Philip's court, Pausanias caught the eye of the king and became his Eromenos, or beloved. Philip's spurned lover, Pausanias, was gang-raped at a drinking party to celebrate his marriage to his 7th and last wife, Cleopatra, around 338 BC. This horrible act was started by a Macedonian nobleman named Attalus. Pausanias asked for justice for the attack after the party, but Philip did nothing. Attalus was the uncle of Philip's new wife, Cleopatra. Instead of punishing the man, Philip chose to look the other way. A bloody succession. Philip's failure to punish Attalus made Pausanias very angry, and he grew to hate the Macedonian king. In the end, that anger turned into a plan to kill Philip 2 years later, in 336 BC. As the king entered the theater at Aegi for another big wedding party, Pausanias killed Philip in full view of everyone. Alexander and Olympias might have been a part of the plan to kill Philip. It's possible, and there's a reason why. As was already said, there was no clear plan for who would take over at the Macedonian royal court. Alexander was Philip's son. Over the past few years, he had been one of Philip's top advisors, most famously leading the companion cavalry against the Thebans and Athenians at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. But Alexander had recently lost his father's favor in 336 BC. He and his mother, Olympias, had both been sent away from the court for a while. There was no promise that Alexander would get the throne before any of the other children Philip would almost certainly have had in the years to come. Both Alexander and Olympias must have felt threatened by Philip's recent marriage to the Macedonian noblewoman Cleopatra. Cleopatra's powerful uncle Attalus openly planned for any male offspring his daughter bore Philip to replace Alexander as Philip's heir in the future. In their eyes, Alexander wasn't fully Macedonian because his mother was from Molosia. In Philip's Macedon, this kind of racism was a big deal. By killing Philip, the offended Pausanias put a quick end to any such chance. One of the most well-known people in history is Alexander the Great. Almost as soon as he died, legends and made-up stories about his life began to spread, often mixing facts with fiction. Alexander the Great is seen in many different ways because he had good and bad interactions with so many different countries and societies. He is seen as a hero, a villain, a demigod, and so on. Philip's death made it possible for Alexander, who was around 20 years old at the time, to quickly take over as king. Threats from people like Attalus and Alexander's cousin Amyntas were taken care of. Attalus and Amyntas were killed, along with Cleopatra and the babies she had just given birth to, Philip, almost as soon as Alexander became king. Philip's acceptance of royal polygamy made it easier for Alexander and Olympias to get rid of anyone who could be a threat to the new government. A horrible way of fighting amongst themselves that would continue after Alexander's death and become a regular terror in the Hellenistic courts of his successors, from the Ptolemies to the Antigonids. As for Philip's ex-lover and killer Pausanias, he was killed while trying to leave the theater where he had done the killing. Philip versus Alexander. Philip was a king who had many lovers. He had a lot of women and a lot of male lovers. He almost certainly also had courtesans. Alexander's sexual life, on the other hand, was more moderate. At least, that's what we get from the Greek and Roman authors Aelian, Arrian, and Plutarch and other sources that still exist and talk about this. Most of the time, these scholars talk about Alexander's sexual restraint. Still, when it came to sex, Philip and Alexander had a lot in common with each other. Like Philip, Alexander took on more than one wife for political reasons. Alexander, on the other hand, would not marry princesses or noblewomen from states that were close to Macedon. He didn't marry an Illyrian princess, but 2 Persian women, not to mention the daughter of a famous leader who ruled in what is now Uzbekistan. This noblewoman was known as one of the most beautiful women in Asia. Like his father, Alexander went out with both men and women. He also had at least one younger Eromenos named Bagoas, who was a Persian eunuch. And that doesn't even include the interesting story of Hephaestion. But Alexander's sexual life is shown to be much more modest than Philip's, who was known for having many partners. Like father, like son? Not so much when it came to what these 2 Macedonian kings did in the bedroom. We hope you liked this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about civilization or time period we should talk about. Also watch another video here.